The silence is deafening in the studio. Only the sound of the lights and cameras fills the room as Dr. Phil McGraw walks to the center of the stage. His walk is firm, his eyes focused, the posture that millions of Americans instantly recognize. He adjusts the microphone on the lapel of his navy blue suit, a deliberate choice to convey authority and confidence. The audience settles in, anticipating another episode where inconvenient truths will be exposed and confronted. But no one, not even the experienced production team, could have predicted what would happen in the next 60 minutes. Today, we're going to hear the story of a family devastated by a tragedy that, as we'll discover, may actually be an elaborate web of lies, announces Dr. Phil in his deep, measured voice. Jason Montgomery, a 16-year-old from Portland, Oregon, believes his mother, declared dead 3 years ago after a terrible car accident, may actually be alive and communicating with him through voice messages. Jason's father, Robert, is convinced his son is suffering from a serious psychological disorder, perhaps even schizophrenia, caused by the trauma of the loss. But Jason insists he has proof that could change everything. The camera zooms in on Dr. Phil as he looks directly into the lens. What happens when the line between grief and reality becomes so blurred that an entire family begins to fall apart? And what will we do when unexpected evidence comes to light, right here, live, in our studio? The lights dim briefly and then return with intensity. Dr. Phil turns to the audience, his expression now more serious. This is a case like no other we've dealt with on this show. And before we finish, you'll understand why some truths are so disturbing that they can shake even the most skeptical among us. Before we continue with this impactful story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of Dr. Phil's upcoming revelations. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what you think will happen in this case. Your opinion is very important for us to continue bringing you this exclusive content that transforms lives. The tension in the studio is palpable when Jason Montgomery enters the stage, a thin teenager with tousled brown hair and eyes that seem older than his 16 years. He wears a simple t-shirt and jeans, as if he wants to go unnoticed, but his story is about to capture everyone's attention. Beside him is his father, Robert Montgomery, a middle-aged man with a worn expression, slumped shoulders, deep dark circles under his eyes, the vivid portrait of someone carrying the weight of immense pain. In the third chair is Dr. Melissa Bennett, the psychologist who has been treating Jason for the past 8 months, a professional presence contrasting sharply with the family drama. Phil leans forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Jason. Jason, you came to me with a story that, frankly, left my entire production team speechless. Why don't you start by telling us what happened to your mother, Sarah, 3 years ago? Jason takes a deep breath, his fingers nervously gripping the edge of the chair. My mother was coming home from work. It was a night of heavy rain, zero visibility. She lost control of the car on a curve and fell off a bridge. The car was found in the river, but his voice falters momentarily. Her body was never recovered. The investigators said the current must have carried her away. Dr. Phil nods, his gaze compassionate. And you held a funeral even without the body, correct? Yes, a memorial. Everyone said it was important for the grieving process. We had to accept it. Jason quickly glances at his father, who keeps his eyes downcast. But I never fully accepted it. I always felt something was wrong. The father, Robert, sighs deeply, shaking his head. Dr. Phil, my son can't get over the loss. He and Sarah were extremely close. She was a music teacher. She spent hours teaching Jason piano. When she was gone, it was as if a part of him died too. The camera captures the moment Jason closes his eyes, visibly disturbed by his father's words. Dr. Phil senses the tension and steps forward. Jason, what has changed? What has happened recently that makes you believe your mother might be alive? Jason straightens up in his chair, a new energy in his posture. 4 months ago, I received the first message. It was late at night. I was studying for a chemistry exam. My cell phone rang, a known number. When I answered, there was no one there, just silence. Then came a voice message. Tension rises in the studio. Dr. Phil raises his eyebrows. And what did that message say? It was her voice. Phil. Jason's eyes shone with conviction. He simply said, look inside the music box. I love you. That music box was a gift she gave me when I was 8 years old. Nobody knew the special meaning the object had for the two of us. Robert interjects, his voice thick with frustration. "Doctor, anyone could have known about the music box. Sarah talked about it with her friends, with family." Jason is clinging to anything to avoid accepting reality. Dr. Bennett, who had been silent until then, finally speaks. Jason shows clear signs of complicated grief and possibly some elements of magical thinking. It is not uncommon for teenagers to develop elaborate narratives to cope with traumatic losses. Dr. Phil observes Jason, who seems to completely ignore the comments of the two adults. "Jason, what did you find in the music box?" "A key. A small key to a safe I'd never seen before." Jason now speaks directly to Dr. Phil, as if the others weren't present. And after that, the messages kept coming. Instructions, clues, little mementos that only she and I shared. Dr. Phil turns to Robert. "And you don't believe any of this?" Robert rubs his face, exhausted. "Dr. Phil, my son has a history of overactive imagination. As a child, he had imaginary friends, created elaborate stories. After Sarah died, he started having problems at school. Isolation, falling grades. I tried therapy, support groups for grieving youth. Nothing worked. And now, this fantasy about mysterious messages." Jason interrupts, his voice raised for the first time. "It's not fantasy. I have proof. Why don't you even want to listen?" Dr. Phil raises a hand, asking for calm. "And this evidence is the voicemail messages you mentioned you brought today." "Yes. I have 7 of them saved on my phone. The most recent one arrived just 2 weeks ago." Jason looks defiantly at his father. "And before he says it could be anyone imitating her voice, I did a test. I took it to an audio specialist at the local university. He confirmed there are no signs of digital manipulation." Robert shakes his head. Jason paid this so-called specialist with the money he saved from his part-time job. He only heard what Jason wanted to hear. The tension between father and son is almost palpable. Dr. Phil realizes he is facing the people trapped in completely opposing narratives, each clinging to their own version of reality. He leans forward, his eyes fixed on Jason. "Jason, do you believe your mother is alive, hiding somewhere, and for some reason can only communicate with you through these encrypted messages?" Jason swallows hard. "I believe she's in danger, that she had to disappear and now she's trying to come back to me, to us." He shoots an accusing look at his father. Unless someone doesn't want her back. The studio falls into absolute silence. Robert seems stunned by the insinuation. Dr. Phil maintains a neutral expression. Is he suggesting that his father might have something to do with his mother's disappearance? The air in the studio seems to grow thicker. Robert Montgomery is visibly shaken by his son's insinuation, his face a mixture of shock and hurt. Dr. Phil keeps his eyes fixed on Jason, who holds his gaze with a confidence unsettling for someone so young. "Jason, that's an extremely serious accusation. Are you effectively suggesting that your father might have been involved in your mother's disappearance?" Jason hesitates for the first time, his gaze wavering momentarily. "I don't know. All I know is that ever since I started receiving the messages, my father has been acting strangely, locking himself in his office for hours. Secret phone calls. And when I first mentioned the messages, he wasn't surprised or curious, he was furious." Robert rises partially from his chair, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. "This is absurd. I loved his mother more than anything in this world. I lost my wife, the woman I planned to spend the rest of my life with, and now my own son accuses me of what exactly? Of faking his death? For what purpose?" Dr. Phil intervenes, his voice firm but calm. "Let's all take a step back here. Robert, please sit back down." He waits until Robert reluctantly obeys. "Jason, you said you brought some of those voicemails. I think we all need to hear them." Dr. Bennett leans forward. "Dr. Phil, as a mental health professional, I must warn you that validating these delusions could be detrimental to Jason's therapeutic process." "These aren't delusions," Jason protests, his voice breaking with frustration. "Why doesn't anyone want to at least hear the evidence?" Dr. Phil looks directly at the psychologist. "Dr. Bennett, I respect your professional opinion, but we are here to seek the truth, whatever it may be. And sometimes, the truth only emerges when we allow all possibilities to be examined." He turns to Jason, extending his hand. "Do you have your phone with the messages?" Jason nods, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "I have them all saved in a special folder. The clearest one is the 3rd one I received." He fiddles with his phone for a few seconds, then looks at Dr. Phil hesitantly. Can I play it back? Please confirm, doctor. Phil says, gesturing for the technicians to adjust the studio sound. Jason presses the play button and turns up the volume. The studio falls into absolute silence as a weak, static interrupted female voice fills the room. Jason, darling, don't trust me. I have to stay hidden. It's not safe to go back yet. The accident was forced. I love you so much. The message ends abruptly. Doctor. Phil keeps his gaze fixed on Robert, whose expression has changed. It's no longer just shock or anger. There's something more, something that seems close to fear. That's not Sarah, Robert says, but his voice lacks conviction. Dad, how can you keep lying? Jason is almost screaming now, tears starting to well up in his eyes. It's her voice. You know it is, doctor. Phil raises a hand, asking for calm. Jason, when exactly did you receive this specific message? 2 months ago, around midnight. Jason looks at his father. It was the night I saw you on the phone in the backyard, talking so quietly I couldn't hear you. You seemed scared. Robert runs his hands through his hair, a gesture of pure despair. This proves nothing. I was talking to a client. I'm a financial consultant. I get calls outside of business hours frequently. And what about the other messages, doctor? Phil asks Jason, ignoring the interruption. Jason swipes his finger across the screen. This one arrived 3 weeks ago. It's the most specific one. Again, the female voice fills the studio, this time clearer, less distorted. Jason, the life insurance. He changed the policy 2 weeks ago. Check with Hancock Insurance. File number 847J. I love you, my pianist. Doctor. Phil observes Robert's reaction. The man is now completely pale, frozen in his chair. Doctor. Bennett also notices the change, her professional expression faltering for the first time. Robert. Doctor. Phil speaks slowly, measuring each word. Did you change Sarah's life insurance policy before the accident? A heavy silence fills the studio. The audience is completely still. The cameras capture every micro-expression on Robert Montgomery's face as he seems to be waging an internal battle. It was my financial advisor's idea. He finally replies, his voice almost inaudible. We increased the coverage. It was a sensible financial move to protect our family. And the file number 847J, press drive. Phil. Robert swallowed hard, his eyes now fixed on the floor. I don't remember specific file numbers. That was 3 years ago. Jason is leaning over the edge of his chair, his eyes burning intensely. The last number she gave me, the one for the secret savings account. I found it, Dad. The money you said didn't exist. Robert's face contorts in an expression of despair. Jason, you have to understand. After your mother died, things got complicated. There were debts, mortgages. So you admit that the notebook exists, doctor. Phil interjects, his voice now laden with a new urgency. Robert closes his eyes for a long moment. When he opens them again, something has changed. It's as if a wall has crumbled. Yes, the passbook exists. Sarah kept a separate savings account, something she started even before we got married. It was her independence money, as she called it. He looks at his son. But that doesn't prove she's alive, Jason. It only proves you found something I tried to hide from you. Doctor. Phil leans forward. Why hide this from him, Robert? The money would legally belong to Jason after his mother's death, wouldn't it? Robert shakes his head slowly. You don't understand. After Sarah, after the accident, I was desperate. Jason's medical bills, the therapy, trying to keep our house. I used the money. I was going to repay it eventually, but you stole from me, Jason whispers, the betrayal evident in every syllable. I did what I needed to do to keep us afloat. Robert explodes. Do you think it was easy? Raising a child alone, dealing with my own grief, with the bills, with everything crumbling around us? Doctor. Phil maintains a neutral expression, but his eyes are focused and analytical. Robert, I'm going to ask you something very specific, and I want you to think carefully before answering. These messages, do you recognize the voice as Sarah's? The entire studio seems to hold its breath. Robert Montgomery remains motionless, as if Dr. Phil's question had the power to turn him to stone. His eyes move rapidly, unfocused, as if he were calculating all the possible answers and their consequences. He begins and then stops. He runs his tongue over his dry lips. It's hard to say. The audio quality is poor. There's a lot of static, Doctor. Phil doesn't look away. Robert, you lived with Sarah for almost 20 years. You slept next to her every night. You heard her voice for 2 decades. Is that her voice on the recordings? Jason watches his father intently, his eyes pleading for a confession, for any shred of truth. Doctor. Bennett looks from Robert to Jason, her professional expression beginning to give way to doubt. It sounds like her, Robert finally admits, his voice almost a whisper. But that doesn't mean anything. Voices can be imitated. Modern technology can create near-perfect simulations. Who would want to do that? Doctor. Phil asks, his voice calm, but firm. Who would have a motive to torment a teenager with the voice of his supposedly dead mother? Robert shakes his head, desperate. I don't know. Maybe someone has a vendetta against me, against our family. Maybe it's some kind of elaborate scheme. Jason stands up abruptly, surprising everyone. Enough of the lies, he says to his father, trembling with emotion. There's something I haven't told you yet, something I received last night. Doctor. Phil adjusts himself in his chair. What did you get, Jason? The teenager pulls a small black flash drive from his pocket. The last message contained a download link. It was a video file. Robert seems genuinely confused. What video? Jason, what are you talking about? I didn't mention it before because I wanted to see your reaction here. Liv. Jason turns to drive. Phil. Can I show you? It's on this flash drive. Doctor. Phil nods to a production assistant, who quickly approaches to retrieve the device. We'll watch this video, if it's appropriate for broadcast. While the assistant connects the flash drive to a laptop off camera, Doctor. Phil addresses Robert. Do you have any idea what might be in this video? Robert shakes his head, his confusion seemingly genuine. None. Jason never mentioned any video before. The production assistant gives Dr. Phil a nod, indicating that the video is ready to be displayed on the studio monitors. Dr. Phil nods in agreement. Let's see what we have here. The large screens around the studio flicker and then show what appears to be a cell phone recording. The image is slightly shaky, as if filmed by nervous hands. It shows the interior of a simple motel room. The date in the lower right corner is just 3 days old. The camera moves and then she appears. A woman, appearing to be around 45 years old, with shorter blonde hair than in the family photos shown earlier on the show. Her face is thinner, tense, but unmistakably similar to the photo of Sarah Montgomery that was shown at the beginning of the episode. My name is Sarah Montgomery, the woman in the video says. Her voice exactly as in the audio messages, but clearer now. I'm recording this on October 15th, 2025. I'm not dead. I had to fake my own death 3 years ago to escape. I can't say much because it's still not safe, but the woman in the video looks nervously at something off camera, as if she heard a noise. She continues, her voice lower and more urgent. Jason, my dearest son, I know you found the clues I left. I know you must be confused and hurt, but you were right all along. I'm alive, and I'm coming back to you. She moves closer to the camera, her eyes intense. Robert knows why I had to leave. He knows what happened that night. It wasn't an accident. Ask him about the phone call from Gordon Pierce the night before. Ask him about the deal with the Westlake Construction Company. Ask him why. The video is abruptly cut off, ending mid-sentence. The studio remains in absolute silence for several seconds. All eyes are on Robert Montgomery, whose face has completely lost its color. This can't be real, he murmurs, but his voice is utterly lacking in conviction. His eyes are wide, fixed on the now empty screen, as if he could still see Sarah's face. Doctor. Phil slowly rises from his chair, his eyes never leaving Robert. Gordon Pierce? Westlake Construction. What could Sarah be implying? Robert. Robert looks like a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. This wasn't supposed to be. Jason approaches his father, his hands trembling. What have you done? What have you done to my mother? Doctor. Phil realizes the situation is rapidly escalating out of control. He subtly signals for security to take their positions, but keeps his voice calm and controlled. Robert, I think it's time to tell the truth. What happened to Sarah? Robert Montgomery looks at his son, at Dr. Phil, at the silent audience. His world is crumbling live, before millions of viewers. When he finally speaks, his voice is choked, almost inaudible. Gordon Pierce was my partner. Westlake was a real estate development project in which we invested everything we had. Sarah discovered. He chokes on the words. Sarah discovered that the land was contaminated. Toxic waste from an old factory. Pierce falsified the environmental reports. Jason takes a step back, horrified. You knew? You knew and did nothing? Millions of dollars. Jason, we were so close to closing the deal, to making a fortune. Sarah threatened to go to the press, to the authorities. Robert's hands are trembling uncontrollably now. Pierce said he'd take care of it, that he'd convince her to keep quiet. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was planning. Doctor. Phil feels something shifting within him. Decades of professional experience, of maintaining composure in the face of the most disturbing human revelations, are beginning to crumble. The magnitude of what is being confessed, the presence of a young man hearing that his father may have been an accomplice in the attempted murder of his mother, it's too much, even for someone with his experience. I'm asking you to stop recording. His voice is low, but firm. The cameramen exchanged confused glances. I said, stop recording. Now, Dr. Phil repeats, his voice rising with an authority rarely displayed. The studio lights flicker, indicating that the live broadcast has been interrupted. Dr. Phil turns to the production crew. I want the audience removed immediately and call the authorities. The studio, once packed with hundreds of spectators, is now almost empty. Only Dr. Phil, Jason, Robert, and two security guards remain, along with a small number of essential production personnel. The main lights have been dimmed, creating a darker, more intimate atmosphere, and somehow more fitting for the truths that continue to emerge. Robert Montgomery is seated in the same chair, but his posture is now that of a defeated man. His body seems to have shrunk, slumped under the weight of his own partial confession. Jason stands a few feet away, refusing to stay near his father. His eyes are red, but his gaze is hard, determined. Dr. Phil walks slowly across the stage, recovering after the unprecedented decision to interrupt the live recording. In 20 years of the show, he had never taken such a step. But what is happening before him transcends the television spectacle. It is a potential attempted murder case being revealed in real time. Robert, Dr. Phil finally breaks the silence, his voice lower, more controlled, but carrying a gravity that fills the empty studio. The police are on their way. Before they arrive, I think you owe your son the whole truth. Not parts of it, not edited versions. The absolute truth about what happened to Sarah. Robert slowly raises his gaze, his empty eyes meeting Drive. Phil single quotes S. You don't understand. Nobody understands. I never wanted her to get hurt. But she got hurt, didn't she, Doctor? Phil presses mercilessly. The car in the river. Was it Pierce who arranged all this? He said he would only scare her, Robert replies, his voice now monotone, as if he were recounting events that happened to someone else. He said he would make it look like a robbery, take documents, her computer with the evidence. I didn't know he planned that he would push her car off a bridge. Jason interjects, his voice trembling with anger. Try to kill my mother? Pierce had gone mad. The business was collapsing. Investors were threatening investigations. Millions were at stake. Robert looks at his son, silently pleading for understanding. When I found out what he was really planning, I tried to warn his mother. I called, I texted, but it was too late. The car had already crashed. Doctor Phil crosses his arms, his expression impenetrable. But she survived. Somehow, Sarah escaped. Robert nodded slowly. 2 days later, I received a message. It was from her. She said she had noticed problems with the car's brakes even before reaching the bridge. The car was already slowing down when it hit the guardrail. She managed to open the window while the vehicle was still partially on the surface and swam against the current to an unseen point on the shore. And was she injured? Asked Drive. Phil. To broken ribs, severe hypothermia, Robert continues. It was almost midnight, a back road during a storm. Pierce had chosen the location and the time carefully. No one saw her drag herself through the woods for almost a kilometer until she found shelter. Why didn't she come home? Why pretend to be dead for 3 years? Doctor Phil asks, though his eyes indicate that he already suspects the answer. Pierce had connections. Dangerous people, investors who couldn't afford to have the scheme exposed. Robert swallows hard. She said it wasn't safe to go back, that they were still looking for her, that she couldn't trust me to protect her. Jason steps closer, his body tense like a violin string about to snap. So all this time, while I was crying for her, while I was suffering thinking she was dead, did you know my mother was alive and in hiding? Robert can't face his son. Jason, you have to believe. At first, I thought it was better this way. Pierce would eventually be arrested for other frauds, the danger would pass, and then his mother could come back. But the years went by, I sank into debt, used the insurance money, her savings, and it became convenient for her to remain dead. Dr. Phil concludes, condemnation evident in his voice. What was Sarah's life worth to you, Robert? What was the price? Robert covers his face with his hands, silent sobs shaking his shoulders. The studio falls silent again, broken only by the footsteps of a producer who discreetly approaches Dr. Phil, whispering something in his ear. Dr. Phil nods, his eyes widening slightly at the information he receives. Jason, Dr. Phil turns to the teenager, his voice changing to a softer tone. There's someone here who wants to see you. The side doors of the studio open, and a female figure enters hesitantly. It's Sarah Montgomery, exactly as she appears in the video, shorter hair, a thinner face, eyes that carry 3 years of exile and fear. But alive, undeniably alive. Mom, Jason's voice is just a whisper, as if he fears that speaking louder might make the apparition disappear. Sarah Montgomery stops a few feet away, silent tears streaming down her face. Jason, my boy. Time seems to freeze in the studio as mother and son gaze at each other, separated by 3 years of absence, grief, and secrets. Then, as if an invisible rope snapped, Jason runs towards his mother, throwing himself into her arms with a sob that seems to carry the full weight of his lost adolescence. Dr. Phil observes the embrace, allowing the sacred moment between mother and son, before turning back to Robert, who watches the scene with an expression of utter shock. How Robert stammers, unable to finish the question. The police didn't exactly find her, Dr. Phil explains, his voice low so as not to interrupt the reunion. Sarah contacted the authorities as soon as our broadcast began today. She was watching from a motel on the outskirts of town, waiting to see if her plan would work. The video Jason showed was part of a carefully crafted strategy. She wanted the truth to come out in a public setting where you couldn't easily discredit or silence Jason. Phil approaches Robert, lowering his voice even further. Pierce is dead, Robert. Car accident 6 months ago. You knew that, didn't you? The man your wife feared is no more, but the consequences of what you two did, those remain very much alive. How did you? Robert begins to ask, visibly surprised that Dr. Phil knew he was already aware of Pierce's death. Sarah told us that you received notification from the law firm that handled Pierce's business shortly after the accident. She intercepted a call of yours 2 months ago when she began monitoring your home. That's what convinced her to initiate the plan to reveal herself. Dr. Phil glares intently at Robert. You knew the main danger was gone, but you continued to hide the truth from Jason. The studio lights are on again, but with a different setting, softer, less dramatic. The audience hasn't returned. This final moment is being recorded only for later editing and broadcast. In the center of the stage, Jason and Sarah sit side by side, their hands intertwined as if they fear being separated again. Robert is no longer present. He was taken away by the police to give a formal statement about his involvement in the attempted murder orchestrated by Pierce and the subsequent insurance fraud. Phil walks to the center of the stage, stopping before the mother and son. His eyes are softer now, observing the miracle of a family partially restored amidst the ruins of so many lies. Sarah, he says gently, you've been in hiding for 3 years, fearing for your life. What made you finally decide to risk everything to contact your son? Sarah squeezes Jason's hand, as if searching for strength. At first, it was pure fear. Gordon Pierce had connections with dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to finish the job if they knew I was alive and could expose their scheme. She takes a deep breath. I fled west, assumed another identity. I worked odd jobs, always looking over my shoulder. But then, about 6 months ago, I learned of Pierce's death through an online newspaper. She looks at Jason, her gaze filled with painful love. Even so, I was afraid to go back openly. I didn't know how involved Robert was, if he had been threatened, or if he was a willing accomplice. So I started sending messages, leaving clues for Jason. I needed to know if it was safe to go back. Dr. Phil nods, understanding. And through these messages, you not only reconnected with your son, but also gathered evidence against your husband. It was never my intention to destroy Robert, Sarah says, her voice firm despite the tears. But after discovering that he had used my insurance money, the savings I had set aside for Jason's education, I realized he had chosen his side. chosen lies over truth, money over family. But how did you manage to escape that night on the river? The official search. How could they not find you? Asks Drive-By Phil. Sarah lowers her voice. Pierce had people in the local police department, part of the corruption scheme involving the land. When they learned that the car had been found, but without a body, a corrupt officer took over the case. The search was superficial and quickly closed. Jason looks at his mother, still absorbing the reality of having her back. I always felt like you hadn't really left. Even when everyone told me to move on, even when the therapist talked about accepting the loss. Something inside me knew. Doctor. Phil observes the two for a moment, then turns to the camera. It's time for his final moment, his message to the audience. But this time, there's a different quality to his demeanor, a vulnerability rarely seen in the doctor. Phil, that the audience knows. In over 20 years on this program, I've encountered stories of betrayal, abuse, lies, and redemption. I've heard confessions that would shake anyone's soul. But today, he pauses, visibly composing himself. Today we witness something that transcends even the limits of what I believe to be possible in terms of human deception. He begins to walk slowly across the stage, his voice gaining strength. When I decided to stop the live recording, it wasn't just because we were witnessing a confession of a crime. It was because I realized that what we were witnessing was too sacred to be treated as entertainment. A young man discovering that his father had conspired, by action or omission, against his mother's life. A woman who had to abandon everything, including her beloved son, to survive. Doctor. Phil pauses, looking directly at the camera. We often talk about truth on this show. We say that truth sets you free, that honesty is the first step to healing. But truth can also be devastating. It can destroy entire worlds built on comfortable lies. He reconnects with Sarah and Jason. The bond between mother and son that we see here has survived 3 years of physical separation, a staged death, and a father who chose deception. It has survived because, deep down, the truth always finds a way. Doctor. Phil looks at the camera again, his gaze intense, penetrating. This is why I interrupted our broadcast today. Because there are moments in human life that are so profoundly personal, so intensely transformative, that turning them into a spectacle would be a violation. Robert Montgomery will have to face the legal consequences of his actions. Sarah and Jason will begin the long journey of rebuilding, and we, as witnesses, have a duty to respect the sanctity of that process. He pauses for a final moment, his voice lowering to an almost confessional tone. For the past 2 decades, I've dedicated my career to exposing truths, no matter how painful. But today I've learned that some truths are so powerful they need space to breathe. Away from the lights and cameras, some reconciliations are so miraculous they deserve privacy to flourish. Dr. Phil takes a few steps toward the main camera, his imposing figure filling the frame. When you encounter your own difficult truth, and we all eventually do, remember that courage lies not only in facing it, but also in knowing when to step back and allow healing to happen on its own terms, in its own time. Sometimes the bravest act is simply to say, "Stop everything. This moment is sacred." The camera slowly pulls back, capturing Dr. Phil in the center of the stage, Sarah and Jason embracing in the background, an image that symbolizes both the destruction and the reconstruction that truth can bring. The lights gradually dim, until only their silhouettes remain visible, 3 figures united by a story that began in tragedy, but now contains the first glimmer of hope, and then darkness.